Buar was amazed and astonished. He tightly pressed his lips, furious, saying to YuWon, "You dare to confront me? You're even crazier than I imagined." Finally, Buar acknowledged YuWon's strength, realizing that he had underestimated him. The villagers were confused, not understanding what had just happened. Only Enjia understood everything that had transpired in the fight between YuWon and Buar. Buar had unleashed a powerful attack, which warranted punishment, yet YuWon still managed to counter it directly. YuWon proactively extended his hand to Buar and Enjia, saying, "You two are quite impressive. I look forward to expanding my vision further." Buar furrowed his brows. YuWon then remarked that Buar's strength was considerable as well. Buar was lost in thought, convinced that he and YuWon would definitely have a rematch someday. He no longer maintained a hostile attitude towards YuWon, quickly extending his hand to shake with him. In the days that followed, YuWon continued to stay in the giant village. Everyone in the village looked at YuWon with admiration. Mana continuously emanated from them as they challenged YuWon, saying they would fight after they finished eating. Buar was the most enthusiastic, determined to win against YuWon. However, YuWon declined his eager attitude, explaining that there would be no fighting today as he had a test on the 20th floor tomorrow, and he needed to conserve his energy. Enjia observed YuWon's current demeanor, recalling their past battles with him. She had thought that with a little more effort, they could defeat YuWon. However, now she realized that even with 5 giant people joining forces, they wouldn't have a chance against YuWon. She was genuinely curious about how strong YuWon would be if he fought seriously. YuWon reassured her that what he had shown in the fight was just normal, and he was still not accustomed to using his techniques. He was still in training. People began to gossip, questioning YuWon. Didn't he say he was looking for the ocean crystal? Would he come back after the test on the 20th floor? YuWon replied that he wouldn't return here anymore. Before proceeding to the next floor, he would search for the stone first. Buar was surprised by YuWon's statement. How could YuWon have time to search for the stone when the test was tomorrow? Buar became even more curious, wondering if the stone was related to the test on the 20th floor. YuWon also told them that Urfa and even the giant deity knew about it, but they didn't mention it. Manhwa was increasingly agitated. If it was that important, then the giants should monopolize it. Why would they want to give it to YuWon? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Unable to believe that Urfa could do such a thing. He knew everything but remained silent, disregarding the giant's suffering. Other giants quickly advised him to calm down. Manhwa couldn't calm down like them. He felt he hadn't said anything wrong. It was precisely because of Urfa's silence that they had almost lost their lives countless times. Moreover, it wasn't just him. It was everyone in the village who had to endure that. He couldn't understand why the stone was so important that it surpassed their lives. YuWon understood Manhwa's dissatisfaction, but from the perspective of a former enemy, he understood why Urfa did what he did. YuWon explained that if outsiders got the stone, everyone in the village would die. Silence was better than destruction. All the pent-up resentment had erupted, and Manhwa became increasingly agitated. He rushed at YuWon and shouted, demanding to know if YuWon knew what he was talking about. YuWon easily knocked Manhwa down and rebuked him, saying that if he didn't know, he shouldn't speak nonsense. Afterward, he let go and left. Manhwa continued to cause trouble, disregarding everything. He was determined to go and get some clear answers from the elder. Buar stepped in, reminding Manhwa to stop and wait. They still didn't know if what he said was true or not. If they wanted to confirm, they could find out after the test tomorrow. Although Buar appeared calm on the outside, he couldn't help but think. He really wanted to know what the elder and his father had hidden. YuWon returned to his room. He had been using his clairvoyance and sensorial perception for 10 days straight, causing him a severe headache. Just as he closed his eyes, Kaini emitted mana again. YuWon continued to ponder why Kaini released mana and reacted to his body. It was because of the trident, the representative weapon of the sea deity Poseidon, or perhaps the remains of the trident's prong. YuWon's Kaini kept reacting when he reached the 20th floor. He was thinking about the possibility that the prong fragments were similar to the origin of Kaini, or the mysterious Haktan crystal. They might also be pieces that reacted with each other. If those three fragments were originally one, then it wouldn't be surprising that they reacted together. If his intuition was correct, he could use them as a Jada. If Kaini could be the key to the test, that would be excellent. If YuWon wanted what he was thinking to be true, he had to find a way to awaken it. As YuWon was drifting off to sleep, something called out to him again, asking him to open his eyes like before. His Kaini, manifested as Than Ho, appeared, whispering in his ear, "We need you so Hephaestus can leap with joy." YuWon immediately opened his eyes. The eye that had appeared in the forge once again appeared before him. Boar and Engia went to the 20th floor test area together with YuWon. Boar looked around and was reminded of Tanthu Island. There, he had almost been killed by a chimera. Whenever he thought of this, Boar didn't know where to hide his face. He quickly shifted the focus to YuWon, trying to forget about that incident. He loudly asked YuWon why they were going together, even though they were told to escort him to the test area. YuWon shook his head, saying he didn't know why. Maybe it wasn't a normal test. Engia then told YuWon that normally their side would pay attention to the test, but they couldn't come due to fear of this place turning into a battleground. YuWon was reminded of Urfa's decision and the cautious nature of the giants. They had hidden themselves since the Gigantomachia battle. Their biggest enemy, Olympus, couldn't ignore this sudden change. If everything failed, the giants would lose their trust in YuWon. Therefore, YuWon had to find the ocean crystal at all costs. The notification system displayed that the test would start in 10 minutes. Before entering the test, YuWon reminded the two young giants, "Just you two go. It means that the tribe's situation has changed significantly, so go berserk." Boar was eagerly anticipating this day. He had been waiting for it for a long time. As soon as YuWon finished speaking, footsteps were heard behind him as a group of people rushed in, shouting loudly, "Don't let him escape. We have to deal with him before he gets to the test area." In their eyes, dealing with the giants seemed straightforward, and they became even more bloodthirsty. However, what unfolded before them was not what they had anticipated. Boar stepped forward, straightened his hand, and pointed at one of them, knocking him down to the ground. Despite being held firmly in Boar's grasp, the man still defiantly threatened them. Engia stepped forward and punched him squarely in the face, causing a complete change in their demeanor. Boar looked at their terrified expressions and felt extremely excited. He informed them, "I'm sorry to announce this, but from now on, we will fight with all our might. So let's play a bit for now." Boar's eyes at that moment instilled great fear in them, completely different from earlier. In another place, the examiner for the 20th floor test, Theseus, received news about Kim YuWon saving some young giants, and the messenger was Horlang, the leader of the Exik Lang Hoi. Additionally, Theseus received information from his close subordinates that the giants were protecting YuWon on his way to the island. Theseus didn't pay much attention to the Ek Lang Hoi. He knew they couldn't defeat YuWon. YuWon was much stronger and more formidable than they thought. He had outsmarted Olympus twice already. Theseus instructed his subordinate that he had sent some people from the department to detain YuWon. They would handle YuWon before the hitmen and administrators focused on the test. The more his subordinate thought about it, the more he found it strange. Why were the giants helping a human? Did they forget about the Gigantomachia battle? The subordinate asked if Theseus thought that the hatred would disappear just because YuWon saved a few kids. However, this question was beyond the subordinate's understanding. How could he know what the giants were plotting to hide? The words of his father, who never acknowledged him, still lingered in his mind. He had told Theseus that the giants were hiding the ocean crystal. He ordered Theseus to find it when he became the examiner for the 20th floor. If Theseus found it, his father would accept someone like him as his son. Theseus remembered every expression on his father's face at that moment, making him even more determined. His father was so obsessed with that stone that he acted against his own orders. Theseus was pondering the connection between Kim YuWon and the giants. Kim YuWon appeared, and the giants left the forest at the same time. Could these two things be related to the ocean crystal? Theseus thought again. Whatever happened, only the ocean crystal could bring the giants together. As Theseus was lost in his chaotic thoughts, he suddenly received a notification from his subordinates that Kim YuWon had escaped. YuWon was now safely entering the test area. Despite some obstacles, he could still enter the test area on time. YuWon looked ahead, believing that Buar and his brother could handle the thugs. They had been dealing with humans for a long time, and now was the time for them to unleash their power. The test information appeared before him. There were numerous sea monsters living on Chaitin Island. In the next 12 hours, kill the monsters and obtain the ocean hearts. Depending on the number of ocean hearts you obtain, you will be given a corresponding score. YuWon always felt that this test was similar to the flag-snatching test on the 11th floor, but the difference was that there was no limit on the number of people passing through the door. He thought maybe they were dreaming of climbing to the next floor and forming a team, but he also felt sorry for them because apart from him, everyone else would fail. YuWon plunged into the water, remembering Urfa's words about the characteristics of the ocean crystal. To awaken it, YuWon needed to aim for the abdomen, not the back. YuWon had to surpass numerous sea beasts to obtain the stone. Even if he managed to survive, it would only be the first obstacle to obtaining the stone. YuWon activated his clairvoyance. He could see the seal deep beneath the ocean floor. At the same time, other players had formed teams, working together to defeat monsters and complete the mission. With over 6 hours remaining in the challenge, they felt extremely confident. Each member could obtain an additional heart for themselves. The team leader looked up at the sky, having received a command to find YuWon and prevent him from reaching Olympus. He was certain that the order came from Olympus, but with his current abilities, he lacked the manpower and strength to capture YuWon. He felt incredibly lucky not to see YuWon anywhere, preferring to be scolded than face YuWon's wrath. He prayed that YuWon would never appear before them. YuWon continued to hide meticulously as they proceeded with their journey. Suddenly, the water ahead surged violently, shooting up like a fountain, catching everyone off guard. YuWon emerged from within the water, calmly asking how many of them were from Olympus. His appearance instilled fear in everyone present, all sharing a common fear that YuWon would kill them there. The stubborn leader wondered why YuWon knew they were from Olympus. Perhaps someone had leaked the information. More importantly, did YuWon have a conflict with Olympus? The leader became increasingly fearful as he pondered. YuWon observed the frightened expressions of the group, continuing to speak calmly, stating that he was merely guessing but was likely correct. This further unsettled everyone, causing them to instinctively distance themselves from YuWon. YuWon observed their fearful reactions and found it rather amusing. He couldn't understand why they were acting this way. He reassured them that he had no intention of fighting them, urging them not to be afraid, as he was not the one they should be fighting. However, the sea stirred once again, with waves surging violently, and a sea monster emerged from below, accompanied by a whole lineage of aquatic creatures. The leader, pale-faced, involuntarily asked how many there were. His teammates urged him to focus on the fact that the sea creatures were approaching them, emphasizing the need to flee quickly or risk losing their lives. However, leaving the island also meant being disqualified from the challenge. Facing the sea creatures alone, YuWon stood ready to confront them. He assured the group that there was nothing wrong with the challenge. Suddenly, the challenge was rearranged, with YuWon focusing all his attention on what lay ahead. He already had a plan in mind and had broken the seal on the belly of the creature using the Thang Viet Vantu technique, awakening the giant turtle. With the seal broken, the difficulty of the challenge would completely change, as the challenges would now be arranged by the administrators, rendering Olympus powerless. Urfa looked at the gem in his hand, wondering about its value now that the challenge had changed. He quickly threw the gem away and, along with his teammates, fled in fear. All the events unfolding were orchestrated by YuWon alone, based on what Urfa had told him. Urfa had informed YuWon that he had made the giant turtle swallow the ocean gem and sink into a deep sleep. He told YuWon that after this challenge, the giants would not allow Olympus to advance, so YuWon must never let the ocean gem fall into Poseidon's hands. YuWon faced the monsters alone, viewing them merely as insignificant pests. Although he could easily defeat them, there was something he couldn't understand: why they kept attacking him. He was also certain that Olympus, despite the chaos upon discovering the ocean gem, wouldn't be able to interfere with the challenge anymore. Once again, the system displayed a message, announcing that the challenge had been rearranged, with the sea turtle having awakened. The challenge area was now the location of the sea turtle. The task was to defeat the sea turtle to obtain the ocean gem. On the other hand, Theseus still couldn't find any information about YuWon. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Why couldn't he find one person on the island? And why couldn't YuWon leave this island? What exactly was happening? The ground shook, and the monsters panicked. Theseus was sure that something abnormal was happening, and he had one thought in his mind. YuWon was the cause of all this. Just then, Theseus received a message from the administrator, informing him that the challenge was being rearranged due to insufficient standards, and he would be relocated from the challenge area. In the blink of an eye, Theseus was removed from the challenge area. YuWon, waiting for the final moment, finally appeared. The sea turtle rose fiercely from the water, and its information appeared before him. A turtle that could become a black turtle, the ruler of level 21, among the most powerful ocean creatures. YuWon couldn't believe that he had managed to change the challenge, and even more unbelievably, the ocean gem had become the reward for defeating the sea turtle. Quickly grabbing the communication gem, he wanted to report the current situation to his father and request assistance. After the challenge, he vowed to tear YuWon apart. At that moment, he inadvertently saw Horlang of Siklanghoy lying flat on the ground, behind whom was the giant Sutar Rancor, the 21st son of Surtur. Sutar arrogantly addressed Theseus, stating they weren't on such friendly terms to greet each other. Theseus, having heard about Sutar's good life as a manager, questioned why he was here instead of managing the challenge area. Theseus' straightforward response surprised Sutar. Sutar deliberately informed Theseus that their people were struggling against YuWon, and he came to help because of their children. They were surrounded by cowardly adults. Theseus immediately understood the situation. Infuriated by the worsening circumstances, he realized that the situation was even worse than he had imagined. Attempting to maintain his composure, Theseus firmly responded to Sutar that if he intended to fight now, he wouldn't avoid it. Warning Sutar not to interfere with the challenge, no matter who he was, Theseus' subordinates immediately gathered around him, waiting for his command. Sutar's laughter echoed as he asked Theseus if he thought the giants would fail the challenge. He loudly announced to Theseus that they were following the orders of the elder leader, Urfa, and would now support the player Kim YuWon. Inside the challenge, Kim YuWon was fully engaged in combat with the sea turtle, unleashing relentless sword strikes upon its opponent. Thanks to his graceful skills, he noticed the appearance of Sutar outside the encirclement. Seeing this, YuWon realized that Urfa had placed a significant bet on him this time. He reassured himself that he wouldn't disappoint Urfa. He wouldn't let it slip away, and he would find the ocean gem. At this moment, YuWon not only had to confront the sea turtle, but also face the swarm of aquatic monsters surrounding him above the sea. The gaping mouths of the giant monsters awaited YuWon's descent from above. He kicked off one of the monster's abdomen for momentum, and flew directly to the sea turtle's position. Activating the special effect of his moonlight sword, YuWon's stamina immediately increased, with his mana recovery speed boosted by 112% thanks to the darkness. The mana recovery speed was further increased by 112%, and his mana deficit was amplified by 56%. The Thanho within him began to emit, seemingly incinerating all the creatures in the vicinity. Moreover, a sword mark appeared on the sea turtle's neck. Facing the colossal sea turtle before him, YuWon spoke to himself, determined to succeed. He recalled the ancient legend passed down through the ages. Whoever finds the ocean gem would become the god of the sea. The sea turtle that Kim YuWon had to defeat was not just a legend, it symbolized the sea god itself. Utilizing every opportunity, YuWon dashed into the sea turtle's body. Its stomach was like a dungeon, not only containing YuWon, but also the pursuing monsters. It seemed they were truly attracted by the ocean gem, or the mysterious allure of the ocean's crystal. YuWon cautiously moved forward, with the seawater unexpectedly rushing in from outside, carrying numerous monsters inside. YuWon quickly activated the Twilight Sword's cloaking ability, disappearing from their sight. The monsters, losing momentum, collided with each other, frantically searching for YuWon's figure. Suddenly, one of the monsters sensed something in front of it, letting out a roar and opening its gigantic mouth as if to devour whatever was in front of it. YuWon, standing before it, swiftly used his sword to block its mouth, which was aimed at him, and with determination, he sliced the creature's body into two. The system displayed notifications that the completion rate of Sathianchitin had increased to 0.001%. Then came a series of similar notifications. YuWon stared at his attributes, thinking that he would have enough points to complete this task. However, considering the completion rate of Sathianchitin, it would take a while. With that in mind, YuWon realized that he didn't need to hunt the Ryu shrimp inside the giant turtle's stomach anymore. Continuing to move forward, YuWon observed while searching for the ocean sapphire. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. The ocean sapphire might be lying somewhere on the ground within the giant turtle's stomach. However, he couldn't predict exactly where it would be. He believed that the most dangerous place could also be the safest, such as the core of a giant creature like the sea turtle. YuWon relied on Kaine's reactions to move forward, knowing he would face many monsters. So he focused on minimizing injuries as much as possible. At that moment, YuWon remembered something crucial. He was using his clairvoyance because it was quite dark. However, relying solely on sight would reduce the predictive ability of clairvoyance. With these limitations in mind, YuWon decided to abandon some of his sight and focus on other senses. He activated the combat sensory skill while the twilight flame appeared in his hand, illuminating the area. The monsters inside immediately recognized him and rushed towards YuWon. Observing the monsters in front of him, YuWon's lips curved up. He realized that he had reached the heart of the monster pack. All the monsters rushing towards him became prey under his sword. YuWon swiftly moved across their bodies, turning them into two halves. However, as they continued to rush towards him, YuWon realized that he couldn't defeat them all. In fact, there were even more monsters than he had encountered during the tower climbing process. YuWon continued to unleash sharp sword strikes against them, but he sensed that his mana and other stats were gradually depleting. Although his mana was increasing slightly due to the twilight flame, he knew he would exhaust himself if this continued. Just before reaching his limit, YuWon decided to end the monster's attacks here. With only half of his mana remaining, YuWon seemed to be nearing his limit. He reminded himself to stay calm and keep his eyes open, hoping for something to appear before he exhausted the rest of his mana. However, the monsters continued to charge towards him. YuWon quickly moved in another direction, causing one of the monsters to fall under his sword. At that moment, his eyes caught sight of something sparkling. The last thing YuWon was looking for had appeared. YuWon slowly approached it. In front of him lay a giant red rock, surrounded by countless sea creatures. YuWon aimed his sword at them and asked sarcastically if they were enjoying their party down there. With a surge of mana, YuWon demanded that they leave if they didn't want to meet their demise. The owner of the ocean sapphire appeared before them, stepping forward like Hermes, protected by Athena, and radiant like Apollo's sun chariot. These were all great works, exemplifying the craftsmanship of the finest blacksmith, such as the Hephaestus Tower. But if one had to choose the most beautiful work, it would be Theseus' Death Thunderbolt, an object capable of obliterating an entire island with a single strike and allowing the user to manipulate the weather at will. YuWon stood before the ocean sapphire, surrounded by ferocious monsters ready to tear him apart at any moment. If they dared to touch the ocean sapphire, it could rival Theseus' Death Thunderbolt. Adamantium could completely transmit the power of the black crystal, the ocean sapphire, and the sky crystal. Of course, the strength of these objects also depended on the skills of their wielders. YuWon recalled how the invisibility cloak of Hades was crafted by one of Hephaestus' disciples, but this version was Hephaestus' own masterpiece, far superior to Hades. YuWon's appearance drove the monsters into a frenzy. They screamed warnings at him while simultaneously attacking. YuWon remained unfazed, his sword glowing as he summoned the powers of Hades. The monsters were cut into pieces by YuWon's sword and vanished along with the flow of mana. YuWon sensed that they had been swallowed by something. Suddenly, excruciating pain shot through YuWon's body, as if his right arm were being torn apart, despite his accent strength being over 100. He realized his body couldn't withstand its power, but he knew he only had to endure it 2 more times to secure the ocean sapphire. YuWon continued to execute his 2-meter stride skill, increasing his jumping distance by 50%. He remained proactive, charging into the monsters, unleashing continuous strikes with his iron sword, dazzling the creatures. But YuWon didn't stop there. He activated his Thanho skill, burning the monsters and activating the celestial pathway, increasing his movement speed by 100% for 5 seconds. With all his remaining strength, YuWon used his clairvoyant skill to locate the exact position of the ocean sapphire. As a dim light appeared before him, the system sent a notification, and his invisibility cloak reacted. A piece of kaini in his hand gradually responded. YuWon had found the precise location of the ocean sapphire. Channeling all his remaining strength, he shattered the red rock holding the sapphire. The rock shattered into pieces, and the giant turtle immediately sensed the pain. The monsters were astonished as they saw YuWon for the first time, witnessing his destructive power. They desperately craved the ocean sapphire, crawling towards the shattered rock. As one monster opened its mouth to swallow the sapphire, YuWon split it in 2 with a swift strike. His body was covered in red fluid, and he looked at the monsters before him, then at his trembling right arm. He reminded himself that he couldn't see anything because of the cloak, but his right arm was definitely in bad shape. To use it perfectly, he needed to increase his action strength and stamina. YuWon claimed what rightfully belonged to him, his face displaying a dangerous demeanor as he demanded the monsters quickly move aside. Outside the examination area, Sutar continued to guard the front, ignoring Theseus's mocking words. In Theseus's eyes, the people before him were fools. How could YuWon defeat the ocean's monsters? But with the current situation, he could only wait. However, when the test ended, he would eliminate everyone present. Suddenly, the giant turtle let out a cry, and everyone looked towards the violently shaking sea, like a tsunami. The system sent a notification to everyone. Player Kim YuWon had passed the test. Theseus gritted his teeth in frustration. He couldn't believe YuWon had won. The giant turtle immediately ordered his subordinates to quickly find and bring YuWon back. Sutar promptly responded to Theseus's order with one of his own, absolutely forbidding Theseus's men from touching YuWon. The battle between water and fire began. Theseus took out his trident and arrogantly mentioned his past encounter with Sutar. Sutar, disgusted by Theseus's attitude, loudly asked if he felt no shame being the son of Poseidon. Theseus, unaffected by Sutar's provocation, calmly replied that he had never been proud of his father. He stated that history repeated itself. The battle erupted, and Theseus seemed to have the upper hand. His subordinates successfully defeated Sutar's giant underlings. Sutar looked around in confusion, wondering if he would be trapped with them again. Would he allow that bloody past to repeat itself? The violent sound of crashing waves abruptly halted the tense battle. Sea monsters emerged from the depths, accompanied by the appearance of a high-level sea monster, Leviathan, the boss of level 20. Everyone looked at each other in confusion. Why were so many sea monsters appearing? Weren't they supposed to live independently? Theseus frowned, finally understanding why his father desired the ocean sapphire so much. Whoever found it would become the sea god, and the ancient legend passed down through generations would become reality. YuWon stepped forward, his voice calm. I apologize for speaking these words while you are struggling, but I am exhausted. So please, all of you, leave now. Theseus seemed intentionally oblivious to YuWon's intent. He demanded YuWon hand over the ocean sapphire and then rushed towards him in excitement. YuWon frowned at him, realizing he wanted to pick a fight. Theseus controlled a stream of water to float towards YuWon, then directed it to strike him. YuWon effortlessly created a barrier, blocking his attack. With disdain, YuWon remarked, "Without water, you're nothing but a fish." Theseus, now furious at YuWon's provocation, couldn't touch a hair on YuWon's head. His trident continuously trembled. If he wasn't mistaken, something was disrupting his power. A colossal force capable of neutralizing mana and water equipment. Only the ocean sapphire could do such a thing. Theseus, desperate for recognition from his father, accepted the punishment from the tower and crazily charged at YuWon. YuWon quickly activated his analytical skill, observing Theseus's attack. He swiftly approached Theseus, unleashing a devastating sword strike. Theseus hurriedly used his trident to defend, pushing both himself and YuWon back. YuWon frowned, realizing he shouldn't let Theseus overpower him. Theseus continuously aimed his trident at YuWon, but each attack was blocked by YuWon's sword. The punishment from the tower inflicted increasing pain on Theseus, yet he refused to give up. He was determined to obtain the ocean sapphire and gain his father's recognition, becoming a true heir of the sea god. Theseus activated the magic of his trident, releasing a tremendous burst of power. YuWon almost succumbed to his force, but quickly used his 2-meter step skill to jump away, increasing the distance between them. He wiped the blood from his mouth, realizing he knew Theseus's weakness, but he needed to be cautious. Theseus slowly approached, pointing his trident at YuWon. He arrogantly declared that after defeating him, he would kill all the giants YuWon had allied with. YuWon stood up, berating himself for not using his invisibility cloak properly, which would have made this fight easier. The battle between YuWon and Theseus continued. To respond to Theseus's challenge, YuWon pointed his sword at him, his voice full of arrogance. YuWon knew Theseus's identity, so he didn't need an introduction. They both shared the same thought: to end this fight quickly and level up. Meanwhile, the battle between the giants and Theseus's subordinates below was fierce. The giants relentlessly advanced, unwilling to be oppressed by Olympus anymore. Returning to YuWon and Theseus, they continued to clash. Theseus intensified his attacks on YuWon, suffering even greater punishment from the tower. In contrast to Theseus's agony, YuWon remained confident, continuing to strike at him. Despite Theseus's efforts, YuWon maintained a certain distance, evading his attacks. Theseus's frustration grew as he couldn't defeat YuWon, suffering increasingly severe pain from the tower's punishment. Unable to do anything, Theseus had to admit that YuWon was formidable. YuWon's ability to anticipate his attacks frustrated him. Theseus wondered why his eyes turned red. YuWon, observing Theseus closely, had a thought. Theseus couldn't use his water abilities because of the ocean sapphire. However, his power, as the son of Poseidon, was still formidable. The disparity in their levels and stats was significant. Just then, the sea churned up violent waves, then abruptly stopped, leaving Theseus extremely puzzled. Slowly, Theseus approached YuWon and asked, "Why did you suddenly stop? Have you finally realized our standings on the schedule?" YuWon couldn't help but chuckle at his words, finding Theseus's confusion amusing. On the contrary, he thought Theseus had stopped abruptly because he was afraid a sea monster was approaching. YuWon's arrogant attitude only further irritated Theseus, who wanted nothing more than to silence YuWon so he couldn't speak another word. A torrent of hatred surged within him, and as he prepared to attack, his subordinates unexpectedly appeared before him, demanding he withdraw. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and a full-blown revolt seemed imminent. How could he swallow this battle and retreat? On the other hand, in the battle led by Sutar, he had overcome the darkness of the past and was ready to face the present. Drawing his sword, he engaged the enemy, and many adversaries had fallen to his blade. Sutar ordered his troops to continue onward, ensuring no one was left alive. His subordinates could detain them as souvenirs of their triumph. The underlings below cried out Theseus's name, urging him to make a decision quickly. The giants didn't speak, but they no longer had the strength to fight the sea monsters. What they needed to do now was retreat. Theseus found himself at a crossroads. Either withdraw or continue the fight. The more he thought, the more conflicted he felt. What he had always desired was right in front of him. How could he retreat now? With his subordinates by his side constantly urging him, he was ultimately forced to withdraw. His subordinates immediately obeyed Theseus's orders and retreated to their base. The sight of his millennia-old enemies retreating was extremely satisfying to Sutar. He wouldn't easily let them go, showering them with countless flames until they were all incapacitated on the ground. Sutar approached YuWon and asked, "Have we won?" YuWon, holding the ocean's crystal in the palm of his hand, replied to Sutar, "Perhaps the burden has finally been lifted." After all this time, Sutar had finally been relieved. This time, they wouldn't struggle to run anymore. The giants had truly defeated Olympus. The news of YuWon's victory in the challenge on the 20th floor immediately spread to the tribe of giants, who threw a grand celebration to congratulate YuWon. However, what made them happiest was their victory over Olympus. After years of oppression, YuWon sat in his room, contemplating whether to join the festivities. Eventually, he decided against it and began to think about his battle with Theseus. The more he thought, the more he felt his own weakness. YuWon admitted his defeat to Theseus, acknowledging that without the ocean crystal, he wouldn't have been able to hold out for so long. If the battle had continued, he was certain he wouldn't have been able to fight back. Sotar felt the same way, knowing that more giants would have died if the fight had continued. YuWon looked at his injured hand, realizing that with his current strength, he still couldn't reach the heart of Olympus. He needed to become stronger. YuWon reviewed his attributes, deciding what to do next. Meanwhile, Vilcaro on the first floor suddenly felt a chill, unable to understand why he felt so uneasy. His unease was quickly explained when YuWon contacted him, announcing that he would soon come to see him with something new to show. Vilcaro became even more annoyed with each of YuWon's visits, as they always brought another astonishing story. In a moment, YuWon appeared before Vilcaro, who couldn't believe that YuWon possessed the ocean crystal. Vilcaro, a son of Poseidon who had spent millennia searching for it, couldn't believe that a brat like YuWon could have it. YuWon's lucky break only made Vilcaro more frustrated, and he shouted at YuWon in disbelief. Despite Vilcaro's anger, YuWon calmly explained that Olympus would soon release him. In Vilcaro's mind, his father had probably been too busy to restrain him. Despite YuWon's intelligence, he couldn't know what was happening within Olympus, but he could still turn the tables. Vilcaro wanted to know why YuWon could do such absurd things. Then, he began to examine the quality of the crystal. Though the quality was slightly different, it resembled Theseus's death ray. YuWon asked if Vilcaro could process it. Vilcaro stared at the stone and said that besides processing, they would need some additional materials to create something more resembling. YuWon trusted Vilcaro's craftsmanship and asked about the completion time, suggesting around 10 days. This surprised Vilcaro, who thought it would require adamantium. YuWon unconsciously said he would try to get it as soon as possible. A seemingly normal sentence, but unusual coming from YuWon. This left Vilcaro extremely astonished. YuWon was even richer than Vilcaro had imagined. After entrusting the task to Vilcaro, YuWon quickly departed. He planned to make the most of his time in Olympus, focusing on leveling up. Vilcaro couldn't help but feel suspicious of YuWon's current dangerous demeanor, wondering if YuWon intended to cause more trouble. YuWon left Vilcaro with the reassurance that he would be duly compensated for his help. As YuWon left the forge, he reflected on how shocked Vilcaro must be feeling. If the old man knew everything he had done, he would surely take a step back. At that moment, Trung Chamhoi showed a dynamic reaction towards YuWon. YuWon glanced at the attribute board of the egg, seeing that its hatching rate had reached 41.29%. He told the egg to wait a little longer, assuring it that it would soon meet its siblings. The egg immediately nodded in agreement, surprising YuWon. He asked if the broken parts of the tower were gathering together, anticipating a joyous occasion when that happened, and whether the egg would be able to eat them. The egg continued to nod in agreement, and YuWon hoped it would patiently wait a bit longer before he fed it. Its food would be placed where Odin had indicated. Additionally, YuWon decided to wait and see if the relationship between Odin and Poseidon truly matched what Hercules had described. Odin had once warned Hercules that raising the sea crystal was something that should not fall into Olympus's hands. But if Hercules obtained it, the consequences would be dire, and would surely become a target for Olympus. However, Hercules assured Odin that Zeus, as the current king of Olympus, wouldn't be able to budge even if he wanted to after obtaining the crystal. If Zeus advanced further, the entire army of giants would follow suit, leading to a complicated situation. They also discussed Poseidon, Hercules' son, and his cautious nature. Despite sharing the same divine bloodline, Zeus and Poseidon were not in harmony, likely due to endless power struggles. Zeus and Poseidon, vying for the number 1 and number 2 positions, were currently watching each other closely. However, Zeus currently possessed one of the three all-powerful crystals and had used it to create the trident of the ocean. He now held half of Olympus's power, leaving Zeus with only two crystals, the ocean crystal and the storm crystal. Hercules recounted all of this to YuWon, who, after hearing the story, asked Hercules for his answer. Hercules coldly told YuWon that if Zeus couldn't give up the ocean crystal, they would have to make Zeus and Poseidon destroy each other. At the same time, Poseidon, after learning about the events that had unfolded in the 20th challenge, became extremely enraged. His third son, Orion, was deeply frustrated, unable to understand why he had to bear his father's wrath just because Poseidon had suffered a defeat. Orion began to blame Zeus, cursing him as useless. Orion bowed his head and reminded his father of the divine warning not to interfere with the giants, but his words only further infuriated Poseidon. Poseidon went on a rampage, destroying objects and yelling curses, accusing Zeus of not wanting him to touch the ocean crystal, and implying that Zeus wanted to take over Hephaestus's role. After venting his anger, Poseidon regained his composure and asked Orion if he thought Zeus was playing dirty tricks on him. Orion hesitated, but instead of directly answering his father, he made an unrelated remark, angering Poseidon even more. Poseidon clenched his teeth and muttered two words, "Power struggle." In his mind, Zeus was always the same, skilled at making excuses, prioritizing pragmatism, and never bleeding even if stabbed. Regardless of YuWon's talents, Poseidon saw him as just a player. From now on, Poseidon decided to temporarily halt tower climb and focus on monitoring YuWon. Whenever he thought of YuWon, Poseidon couldn't control his temper, throwing everything around him. He questioned why he should restrain himself when he was the reason for players joining and meeting the standard requirements. Poseidon wondered why he had lost all opportunities at Asgard, the giant's castle. Meanwhile, the giants approached Odin, asking if he had heard about a player possessing the ocean crystal. Odin found this incredibly interesting, especially because the owner was a snotty kid. He speculated that the Olympus summit might be seething with anger by now. In another place, the god of war, Ashura, had also heard the name Kim YuWon. He wondered if he would have the chance to defeat Kim YuWon. The news of YuWon owning the ocean sapphire had even spread to the mountain fruit, where Tongokong was training. Ashura found this increasingly intriguing. He had thought YuWon was just a brat, but he didn't expect there was some courage in him. Ashura was genuinely looking forward to what would happen next. Then, YuWon used 1,000 points to rent a horse-drawn carriage to reach the first floor. Kim YuWon advanced forward. He heard others say that no one had ever been able to break the statue on the first floor of the tower. They never thought that one day, this statue would collapse on its own. YuWon activated his clairvoyance to begin retrieving weapons. He glanced around, quickly searching for the statue everyone talked about. Suddenly, a beam of light shot straight up into the sky in front of YuWon. He hurried forward. Odin had mentioned this to him. This particular thing wasn't part of the first floor. Before YuWon returned to the artificial dungeon created by him to be explored hundreds of years after this moment. YuWon still remembered that the remaining two children of the three disaster children had found the missing piece to complete the weapon of the three gods, the sacred object of Susanoo. Like that, the comrades, the brothers of it, were in his hands, so he was quite sure he could find them. Although YuWon felt extremely guilty about what he was about to do, he would still be the one to take them. YuWon pinned the sword straight down to where the light was emitted. The system immediately displayed the line, "You have unlocked a hidden dungeon, the sacred object of Susanoo." YuWon immediately stepped inside. He looked at the towering tower in front of him. Even YuWon couldn't believe he had shortened the time to discover the dungeon by hundreds of years. The task of the dungeon was quickly revealed after this moment. Conquer the tower to obtain Susanoo's hidden sacred object. Once you find the key, you can leave the dungeon. YuWon was preparing to break into the tower when suddenly monsters appeared behind him. They looked at him with extremely hungry eyes. YuWon frowned at them. In his eyes, they were just shrimp. YuWon's sword swept across them. The group of monsters lay dead on the ground. However, the system notified YuWon that the purity of the Star Divine Spirit did not increase until YuWon killed the last monster. The purity of YuWon's Star Divine Spirit only increased by 0.001%, even though YuWon had killed the last monster. YuWon looked at the percentage of the purity of the star divine spirit. He began to feel strange. When he conquered a giant turtle, the purity should have increased by about 0.5%. It would have been great if he had achieved 100% purity at that time. YuWon thought for a while, but no matter what, thanks to his combat senses, his sensory index had increased significantly compared to before. Moreover, now he was at level 80 compared to other players at the same level, which was a significant advantage. The tower demanded that YuWon must advance to the 100th floor to overcome Susanu's challenge. YuWon looked around at the towering spires everywhere. He felt that the width of this tower was not commensurate with its height. Could this also be a labyrinthine dungeon? YuWon recalled that although he had never met Susanu, he had heard a lot about him, both good and bad. Along with his bad reputation, many people mentioned him as a powerful individual. Just then, a treasure trove suddenly appeared before YuWon, catching him off guard. From inside the treasure trove, a young man with a sword on his shoulder emerged, looking at YuWon with suspicion. "Where are we? Are we in a small tower? I must be dead," the young man said, seemingly annoyed. YuWon didn't even know his name, yet he replied, "You are the bearer of the Tosca mirror, aren't you?" The young man continued his conversation with YuWon, saying, based on the way YuWon spoke, he probably didn't know his reputation. YuWon became increasingly suspicious of the figure standing before him. He remained silent, observing him. This being had an extraordinary appearance, emitting a terrifying aura. After analyzing for a while, YuWon seemed to have guessed his identity. YuWon interrupted the young man's speech, telling him that he was Susanu, one of the 3 disaster children, an excellent swordsman, and also a Chu Hansu. Susanu seemed surprised that someone as seemingly ordinary as YuWon could have so much information about him. The smile on Susanu's lips faded as he heard YuWon mention the reason for his demise. He looked at YuWon with fiery eyes. YuWon seemed to pay no attention to Susanu's current attitude and continued speaking. He acknowledged Susanu's past greatness but wanted to ask him, after living such a life, why he wouldn't want the respect of people. Susanu now seemed to think of himself as already dead, and the amount of respect he had received in his life was enough. Furthermore, he didn't die seeking respect. Although YuWon knew a lot about him, Susanu wanted to correct some misconceptions. YuWon then stated that Susanu's life was not just that, it was a magnificent life. YuWon calmly responded to Susanu's apparent pride in his killing accomplishments, which further irritated Susanu. He began to speak harshly to YuWon, reminding him that this was not a place for the weak, and YuWon would only face death confronting the countless monsters here. However, YuWon remained indifferent, stating that he had already defeated several monsters on his way here. Susanu was surprised by YuWon's resilience, considering him far less capable than he had imagined. He continued to warn YuWon that if he still had a fragment on him, Susanu would have to follow him, as it was how he arranged this dungeon. YuWon didn't care. He continued moving forward, but Susanu flew alongside, constantly asking unrelated questions, making YuWon increasingly annoyed. Susanu then proposed a condition to YuWon. If he told Susanu where he found the sword fragment, Susanu would stop asking questions. YuWon wasn't one to be easily intimidated. He countered Susanu's condition, stating that if Susanu was curious, he should at least show YuWon the way. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. I hate maze-like dungeons because they take too much time, YuWon added. Susanu looked at YuWon and then begrudgingly agreed to show him the way. After Susanu guided him, YuWon escaped the maze. He recounted to Susanu how he had obtained the fragment on the first floor in the arena challenge and defeated a creature. Susanu was even more astonished. He hadn't expected such an important fragment to appear on the first floor. In his mind, a certain entity YuWon mentioned seemed to flash. Could it be Batdai Kikse Orochi? YuWon swiftly displayed his strength in front of Susanu, making Susanu increasingly incredulous. The latter silently observed YuWon, a kid wearing peculiar gear who managed to catch Orochi. Susanu was genuinely curious about YuWon's identity and how he accomplished such feats as defeating Orochi on just the first floor challenge, especially as a regular tower climber. As Susanoo continued to question YuWon, asking why he broke through walls, YuWon's sole reason was to level up, increase his strength, endurance, and agility. Breaking through Susanoo's tower walls also resulted in YuWon leveling up and increasing his attribute points. YuWon then used his sword to deal with the souls and undead floating nearby, forcing them to disperse. He then questioned Susanoo if they all died by his hand. Susanoo's life had claimed many, and perhaps he didn't remember if they died by his hand, but if they appear here, it was likely so. YuWon looked at Susanoo with disdain. Climbing the tower meant stepping on corpses to ascend, a horrifying reality. Slowly, YuWon pushed open the door to the next floor, having encountered all sorts of people in his life, but Susanoo was a first. Susanoo smirked. Someone who had just reached the 21st floor dared speak to him in such a manner. YuWon had only climbed to the 10th floor of the main tower. YuWon entered the room, and a thick mist obscured the forms of the monsters lurking within. The mission displayed on the system: defeat the corresponding enemy in room number 1. After passing room number 1, room number 2 will open. Proceed through room number 5, then you can move on to the next floor. Without hesitation, YuWon stepped forward, ready for combat. He used his Thanho technique to attack the monsters, instantly incinerating them. YuWon swiftly proceeded to break through the doors of the next rooms. However, Susanoo kept interrupting, asking if YuWon wanted to know anything. As Susanoo reminded YuWon about the nature of the creatures they were facing, having been slain by Susanoo himself, YuWon became increasingly convinced of the rumors surrounding Susanoo's infamous reputation. However, he remained determined to proceed. As YuWon continued to climb, he absorbed the resentment of the slain creatures, a phenomenon he couldn't understand. He also pondered over the voices he heard after defeating something, wondering about the meaning behind the system's message regarding absorbing resentment. Finally, YuWon reached the 40th floor and discovered Susanoo's treasure, collecting the cloak of the 4 great spirits. Donning the cloak bestowed upon him by the elemental spirits of fire, water, wind, and thunder, YuWon felt a surge of power coursing through him, enhancing his elemental resistances. 42 days had passed since YuWon entered Susanoo's tower, during which he began to hear voices after defeating enemies, a high-level skill of the Chiu Hansu. This prompted him to consider its connection to Kaini, although the true nature of the phenomenon remained elusive. Meanwhile, Susanoo continued to observe YuWon, noting his exhaustion and the gloves on his hands. He sensed the gloves' special abilities and wondered why YuWon hadn't used them yet, suspecting they weren't merely ordinary weapons. When YuWon requested guidance on how to use them, Susanoo nonchalantly remarked on their similarities, prompting YuWon's suspicion. YuWon's thoughts turned to the gloves and their potential beyond summoning infernal beings, considering the enigmatic history of their former owner, Hades. Despite his transformation, YuWon acknowledged his limitations compared to higher-ranked individuals. As Susanoo whispered to YuWon, acknowledging his increased strength, but also hinting at the power gap between them, YuWon grew irritated, urging him to stop dancing around the issue. YuWon proceeded to another floor, where Susanoo warned him of its difficulty. YuWon, curious about the extent of the challenge, cautiously entered as the door swung open. Immediately, he felt a sense of unease, scanning the area for any sign of danger. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound amidst the fog, and a figure emerged, with deep blue eyes emanating powerful aura, fixated on YuWon. The mission appeared: slay the ruthless knight, defeat King Arthur. Past and present intertwine. A young boy dashed in, calling out to Merlin, urging him to leave the library for physical training. Ignoring his friend's plea, Merlin clung to his books, stating he had no intention to accompany him. As books scattered on the ground, Arthur's sword struck down, ending the past timeline. Arthur, the once valiant king and leader of the Knights of the Round Table, now undead, wielded the legendary Excalibur. Though not originally a high-ranking ranker, Arthur's name quickly rose after his demise, becoming YuWon's formidable opponent. As Arthur lunged at him, YuWon swiftly evaded, activating his Herm's footstep skill to maneuver and block Arthur's attacks. YuWon countered with Manhwa, engulfing his sword with flames, intensifying its power. Knowing he couldn't defeat Arthur in direct combat, YuWon relied on his enhanced skills. Despite Arthur's diminished strength, he remained a formidable adversary under Susanu's control. In a sudden move, YuWon questioned Arthur, distracting him, then swiftly stabbed him in the abdomen. Arthur, standing before him, transformed into ice. Bewildered by Arthur's speed, YuWon realized the depth of his abilities. Arthur's mana formed ice arrows, piercing YuWon simultaneously, causing the ground to tremble as the fog thickened. The system sent a notification to YuWon, alerting him of a severe drop in his body temperature, indicating severe frostbite. The armor of the four elemental spirits was resisting the cold, but Arthur's ice arrows, controlled by him, relentlessly targeted YuWon. Thanks to his clairvoyant eyes, YuWon was able to anticipate Arthur's attacks, though they were simple yet perfect, and the ensuing dark smoke obscured their babble. A sudden surge in YuWon's body temperature was detected, indicating a successful resistance to the numbness. Manhwa seemed to radiate warmth around YuWon, protecting him from the cold. As Arthur continued his assault, YuWon activated his skill, Manhwa, intending to counter his attacks. Determined not to let Arthur maintain the upper hand, YuWon swiftly launched a counterattack, severing Arthur's arm. Undeterred, Arthur lunged forward, but YuWon's enhanced abilities allowed him to anticipate and evade the attack. With a powerful strike, YuWon managed to wound Arthur severely. Seeing Arthur in pain, YuWon approached him, suggesting he cease fighting. However, YuWon continued to absorb Arthur's rage, his face showing signs of disdain as he looked up. Unexpectedly, Arthur's voice rang out, addressing YuWon directly, expressing a desire to meet Merlin. Arthur proposed a pact, offering his aid in exchange for a meeting with Merlin, whom he wished to speak to before his demise. He revealed Lancelot's betrayal of Camelot, sparking YuWon's curiosity about the knight's motives. Though tempted to help Arthur, YuWon knew he lacked the power of a Chiuhansu to grant his request. He explained his limitations to Arthur, promising to explore alternative solutions. With a newfound determination, YuWon vowed to confront Merlin and defeat Lancelot for the sake of Camelot. Thanking YuWon, Arthur's body disintegrated into dust, which YuWon collected within his gauntlet. The system notified YuWon of his acceptance of Arthur's plea, indicating that Arthur would commence his mission to purify Camelot. Upon completion, YuWon would earn Arthur's unwavering trust. YuWon had thought it a simple request, but it turned out to be a choice shrouded in mystery, hinting at unforeseen consequences. Until YuWon defeated Arthur, Susanu did not appear. Upon his arrival, he immediately began speaking, declaring the futility of this end, asserting he would become a useful undead. YuWon picked up his sword and began questioning Susanu's motives, asking if he didn't just kill Arthur randomly. Susanu maintained his sinister tone, informing YuWon that if he climbed to the top, he would answer all his questions. YuWon urged Susanu to hurry, eager to complete the test and take a break. At floor 50 of the ranking management tower, Tongokong was furious, demanding everyone stop stammering and answer his questions. The administrative director intervened, admonishing Tongokong and continuing to respond to his inquiries. Unable to extract personal player information, Tongokong stormed off, leaving a wave of discomfort among the others. As they pondered YuWon's situation, they reminded each other not to share anyone's information or ranking. The administrative director felt a bit sad, realizing they couldn't share player information, yet they knew very little about YuWon, despite their knowledge of the tower. YuWon had been on level 21 for 3 months without any signs of continuing to ascend the tower. Despite feeling fatigued, he persisted in completing Susanu's tower. Having passed level 99 of the test, his level reached 96, significantly boosting his stats. Sitting in a corner, YuWon activated a ladder, preparing to tackle the final challenge on level 100. Susanu reappeared, questioning why YuWon was sitting quietly. YuWon's progress to level 99 surprised Susanu, who had often wondered if YuWon was a ranker. Approaching the final door, YuWon informed Susanu that he was no longer a ranker. Susanu was surprised, struggling to understand YuWon's true intent. As the door to the final level slowly opened, YuWon stepped inside. Suzanu's soul vanished instantly, leaving behind a familiar yet distant voice echoing in YuWon's ears. "You've done it. You killed me." YuWon felt puzzled, murmuring, "But you killed Arthur." The voice persisted, and YuWon realized the ultimate boss might be Suzanu.